They said I'd slow things down. Me, the one who used to roast 2 turkeys and still have time to sew angel wings for the nativity play. That's how they said it. As if I weren't in the room. Christmas is for the kids, Mom. You'll just, you know, it's hard to coordinate when there are too many people. And then the voice dipped into that syrupy tone they use at nursing homes, all soft edges and guilt-soaked patience. Let's just do something after New Year's, okay? I nodded. That's what I do now. Nod. Richard had one hand on his phone and the other on his car keys. Joanna stood behind him, already dressed for the office holiday brunch. Tight red sweater, sparkly reindeer pin, lips too bright for breakfast. My tea was still steeping when the door clicked shut behind them. I don't remember if they kissed my cheek. Probably not. I sat there for a while. It was the 21st of December. Outside, the frost had crept up the corners of my kitchen windows like lace. The sun broke across the snowbanks in soft gold stripes. Across the street, the Higgins boys were throwing snowballs at their mailbox again, missing wildly and giggling every time one hit the curb. I'd wrapped a book for each of them last week. Paperbacks from the discount bin. Cowboys and dragons, adventure stories for grubby fingers. They were still in the guest bedroom, stacked in a laundry basket under the bed. Along with everything else. Evelyn's watercolor set, Jack's Lego kit, a knitted scarf in forest green for Joanna. I'd learned the pattern from YouTube tutorials, my eyes aching at night from the tiny stitches. For Richard, a leather-bound planner with his initials stamped in gold. I'd ordered it in October because last year he'd said he hated digital calendars. Too many tabs, too little time. Each gift had a note. Not a tag, a note. Handwritten. Quiet little thoughts. For your long train rides, Evie. To paint the world as you see it. That kind of thing. I'd wrapped them slowly. It had taken weeks, with Christmas music playing low on the radio and the scent of orange peels and cinnamon clinging to the air. Some nights I cried. Not because I was lonely, but because I'd convinced myself this year would be different. I hadn't been invited to the family gathering. They hadn't said it outright, but when I asked about dinner, Richard coughed and glanced at Joanna, who quickly explained that this year was going to be kid-focused, less formal, more energy. Then she said it, like handing me an expired coupon. Christmas is for the kids. And I suppose I'm no longer one of those. I don't remember when I stopped being part of it. It wasn't one moment, I think. It happened like winter comes. Gradually, until one morning, the lawn is white, and you can't remember when the grass disappeared. This morning, I made myself toast and sliced a pear. I didn't turn on the tree lights. I sat in the armchair in the front room and listened to the sound of car tires on packed snow, watched the morning run its course. A squirrel darted across the porch railing, tail flicking, and I thought, what now? I'd already bought the ham, already set aside the cranberry compote. I even got the brandy butter, just because Evie loved it when she was little. The fridge was full, the guest bed made, and the hallway smelt faintly of cinnamon and pine. So I stood up. I went to the guest room. I pulled the laundry basket out from under the bed, and one by one, I began to read the names on the tags. Then I peeled them off. I folded the green scarf into a plain brown bag. I tucked the planner into a paper envelope. The Lego kit I wrapped again, this time with newspaper. Then I set them by the front door, like offerings. At noon, I put on my coat, the thick gray one I'd had for years, and my warmest boots. I added lipstick, out of stubbornness. Then I carried the first bag across the street and rang the Higgins doorbell. Jenny opened the door. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her eyes wide. "Merry Christmas," I said simply. "This is for you." I didn't wait for her mother to call out, didn't ask for permission. I just handed the bag to the girl, smiled, and turned back toward the street. That afternoon, I visited 4 houses. By sunset, my basket was empty, and I didn't feel lonely. I felt seen. The laundry basket was empty, but I didn't put it back under the bed. I left it by the door in case it might fill itself again with something worth carrying. That evening, I sat alone in my living room and drank the mulled cider I'd made for the kids' table. It tasted too sweet, but it warmed my chest all the same. Outside, the snow had begun again. Fine, slanting lines under the glow of the street lamp. You could hear the hush of it if you stood very still. And I did. There was no music, no chatter, no clinking plates or squeals over wrapping paper. But it wasn't empty, the silence. It had weight. I'd forgotten what silence felt like when it belonged to you, not just filled the gaps between someone else's stories. At 8 sharp, the phone rang. I knew it would be Richard. Right on time, calling to check a box. "Hi, Mom. We just finished up here. Thought I'd call and say Merry Christmas." His voice had that same casual speed, the kind people use when they're backing away from something. Joanna probably told him to do it, or maybe it was guilt. I couldn't tell anymore. "Merry Christmas," I said. He didn't ask where I was or what I'd done today. Just started rambling about how the cousins were bouncing off the walls and how Joanna's caramel tart had turned out almost bakery level. "That's lovely," I replied. I meant it. But there was a bruise under every word. Then he said, "We'll stop by later in the week if we can swing it. Joanna's got a thing on Thursday, and the boys are at their dad's next weekend, but maybe early January?" "Of course," I said. "Of course." He hung up after 3.5 minutes. I know that because I stared at the call duration. 3 minutes, 28 seconds. That was what a mother got now. Nearly 4 minutes. I poured the rest of the cider into the sink and washed the mug. I dried it carefully and put it away. Then I stood in the kitchen with both hands on the counter, staring out the window. Next door, the kitchen light in the Garcia's house was still on. I saw shadows moving. The older girl, Anna, was washing dishes. She was 13, maybe 14. I remembered her walking home from school with a broken backpack and scuffed boots last March. Her parents worked nights, both of them, and I often saw her guiding her little brother across the icy sidewalk with one arm while juggling grocery bags with the other. I had something that might fit her. I went back into the bedroom. The green knit scarf. That had been for Joanna. But Joanna had plenty of scarves, and none of them ever seemed to suit her, according to her. Anna wouldn't care. I didn't wrap it. I folded it in a soft square and placed it inside a plain white bakery bag I had left from the Thanksgiving pies. No ribbons, no tags. Just warmth. It was past 9, but I didn't hesitate. I put my boots back on, slipped the bag under my coat, and stepped into the snow. Their front porch had a missing plank that I stepped over carefully. I knocked twice. Anna opened the door. "Hi," I said, holding the bag toward her. "This is for you." I made it myself. She blinked, her face pink with surprise. "For me?" "Yes." She didn't ask why. She just smiled, small and shy, and took it with both hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Clark." She said it like it meant something, like it mattered. When I got back home, I realized something odd. My chest didn't hurt the way it usually did at night. The tightness, the familiar cold ache behind the breastbone. It wasn't there. Not tonight. I sat in the armchair, not turning on the lamp. Just the tree lights now, flickering gold and green in the corner, casting gentle shapes onto the carpet. There were 5 more gifts left. I unwrapped them all. I peeled off the names and put them aside. I would find new ones, one by one. The next morning, the sky was pale and flat, like someone had scraped all the blue out of it with a butter knife. Snow still lay heavy on the ground, undisturbed except for the trail of small boot prints left by the Higgins boys and the soft indentations of my own path from the night before. I brewed a fresh pot of coffee, the good kind I save for company, then laughed at myself. Company wasn't coming. Not this year. The living room still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the sachet I'd tied to the tree. I'd done that in early December, humming along with the radio, telling myself I wouldn't go overboard this time. But I did. Like always. Old habits die stubbornly. By 10 o'clock, I had the remaining 5 gifts unwrapped and rebundled. Gone were the glossy bows, the matching name tags, the elegant foil paper I'd ordered online with Richard's family in mind. Now the gifts were nestled into simple grocery bags, lined with tissue I had crinkled just enough to make it feel like a secret inside. They weren't worth much, not in money. A puzzle, a small music box, a set of colored pencils, a warm hat, and a book of riddles. But each had been chosen with someone in mind, and now I would choose new recipients. The 4th house was 3 doors down, pale yellow with a broken screen door and an overgrown juniper bush leaning over the front steps. The Bartons lived there, a young couple, too young for their responsibilities, with 3 children under 7. I knew because I'd heard the meltdowns through open windows in July and seen the baby's socks drying on the porch rail in October. They were doing their best. You could see it in the father's tired wave and the mother's determined smile. I hadn't been inside their house, but I knew the rhythm of their life from a distance, and I had something for them. I carried 2 bags this time. When I knocked, it was the father who opened, wiry, bleary-eyed, with a smear of something on his t-shirt that might have been applesauce or paint. "Morning," I said gently. "These are for your kids, if that's all right." He blinked at the bags, clearly confused. "What's this?" "Just a few things I had," I said. "Extras, really. I thought your little ones might like them." He took the bags slowly, like they might crumble. "That's incredibly kind." I shook my head. "No, it's just Christmas." He stood there for a moment, staring at me like he was trying to memorize my face. Then he said, "Thank you, ma'am," and his voice cracked on the last word. I turned before he could say more. Back home, I crossed 2 names off the list I'd started writing. 1 name per gift, even if I didn't always know it. I wrote Barton Boy 3YO and Barton Girl 6YO with my tidy block handwriting. I liked to remember who had received what, not for credit, just for peace. I looked at the remaining 3 gifts. There was a knock at my door. When you live alone, you notice the sound of a knock, the rhythm of it, the weight behind it. This one was light, polite, a child's knock. I opened the door to find Jenny Higgins. Her boots were unevenly zipped, and her gloves didn't match. In her arms, she held the paperback I'd given her the night before, the one with the dragon on the cover. Her cheeks were pink, and her nose a little runny. "Grandma says to tell you thank you," she said, eyes bright. "I've already read 3 chapters. The dragon talks." "He does," I nodded. And he gets even better. Jenny shuffled her feet. Do you have any more? I smiled, the kind that starts somewhere deep in your ribs. I just might. I went to the side table and picked up the puzzle box. A landscape scene, 500 pieces, maybe too many for her alone, but perfect for a family afternoon. Here, I said, handing it over. This one's for when the dragon takes a break. She grinned. Thank you, Mrs. Clark. And then, on impulse, she hugged me. Her little arms barely reached around my coat. When she let go, she ran off down the steps, puzzle clutched to her chest. I stood in the doorway and watched her go. That was 3. 2 left. I sat down with the list again and started thinking. There were always more children than you realized. The world didn't lack for need, just attention. And today, I had both. By the time I stepped outside again, the wind had picked up. The kind that tugs at your coat buttons and slips between your collar and your neck like a cold whisper. I pulled my scarf tighter. The last 2 gifts were tucked inside my canvas tote. One on either side, balanced like scales. It felt fitting. The Peterson twins lived a few blocks over in the green duplex that always smelled faintly of fried onions and laundry soap. Their mother, Candace, had gone to school with Richard, though I doubt he remembered her. She worked nights at the hospital, cleaned houses on weekends. I'd seen her dragging 2 car seats into the laundromat one Sunday morning, her eyes hollowed out from lack of sleep. The twins were 6, small, quiet, and usually glued to each other's sides like mirror images. I'd never spoken to them directly, but I'd watched them draw chalk cities on the sidewalk outside their apartment, careful not to step on each other's lines. I rang the bell. It took a while. Eventually, Candace cracked open the door, still in her scrubs, hair pulled into a tired bun. She blinked like she wasn't sure if I was real. Hi, I said gently. Sorry to bother you. I have something for the kids. She looked down at the bag I held out and then back at me, frowning in polite confusion. Sorry, do we know you? Not properly. I live a few blocks away on Elm. My name's Madeline Clark. I know this is unusual, but I had a few extra gifts. I thought the twins might enjoy them. Her fingers hesitated on the doorframe. This isn't a donation or... No, I said simply. It's just Christmas. A long pause. Then her shoulders dropped, and she nodded. Wait here. She disappeared for a minute. I stood there with the bag pressed against my coat, wondering if maybe I'd overstepped. Maybe I was foolish. Maybe this was too much, too late, too... Then the door opened again, wider this time. The twins stood there in matching socks, sleepy-eyed and curious. Candace crouched beside them, placing one hand on each back. This is Mrs. Clark, she said. She brought you a surprise. I knelt slowly, knees stiff from the cold, and handed the first parcel to the boy and the second to the girl. No names, no expectations, just giving. The girl turned it over, shook it gently, then looked up. Do we open them now? You can, I said, or wait for tomorrow. They looked at each other, that silent twin language, and decided now. Small hands tore gently, as if the paper might fight back. Underneath was the music box for the girl, soft blue with stars painted on the lid, and the riddle book for the boy, worn just slightly from my own browsing. Oh, the girl whispered as the music began. It played a tinkly version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. She held it to her ear, swaying slightly. The boy opened the first page of the book and grinned. There's jokes in here, he announced. Candace looked at me with something unreadable on her face. Then she stood, stepped outside, and pulled the door gently shut behind her. "Why?" she asked quietly. Not unkindly. Just searching. Why us? I tucked my gloves into my pocket. Because someone told me Christmas was only for children this year, and I believed them. Until I realized they were wrong. She nodded slowly. "Well, thank you. I mean it. I know." We stood there for a moment, two women on a crooked porch in the cold, both holding more silence than we knew what to do with. Then I turned and walked away. My tote was empty. At home, I placed the bag on its hook and took off my boots. My knees ached, and my fingers were stiff, but my breath came easier than it had in weeks. No wheezing, no tightness, just space. I made myself a late lunch, toast and sharp cheddar with pickled onions, the kind Richard used to wrinkle his nose at, and sat at the kitchen table with a pen and the pad of paper I kept for grocery lists. I wrote down each name as best as I could: Jenny, Anna, Barton children, Peterson twins. Underneath, I wrote one more, for myself. Then I underlined it twice. The next morning came soft and gray, the kind of light that never fully becomes day. I sat on the edge of my bed with the pad of paper still in my hands. The list from yesterday looked back at me, not like an inventory, but like a roll call. Each name now tethered to a moment, a look, a thank you that felt more real than anything I'd heard from my own family in years. I'd written for myself at the bottom almost as a joke. But now, sitting there in my thick house socks and old nightgown, I realized I had no idea what that meant. What did I want? No one was coming. The phone had stayed silent since Richard's brisk call on Christmas Eve. I hadn't heard from Joanna, not even the twins, not even Evie. Not a text, not an e-card, nothing. Silence had never been so complete. I didn't cry. That surprised me. I'd cried last year when they forgot my birthday and sent a belated card with a pre-printed message. I cried the year before when they rearranged Christmas dinner to a location with better parking, meaning I wasn't expected. But this year I was tired of crying. I made oatmeal and topped it with cinnamon and brown sugar. Ate it slowly, watching the snow fall again. It was fine snow, steady, not in a hurry to go anywhere. Like me. After breakfast, I pulled out the small Christmas tin I kept in the back of the kitchen drawer. Inside was a tiny nativity set. Not the full ceramic kind, just 3 plastic figures from a toy shop: Mary, Joseph, and a sleeping baby. I used to put them up on the mantle, but this year they'd stayed in the drawer. Forgotten, like their owner. I set them on the windowsill anyway. It felt right. Not grand. Just enough. At noon, I walked to the mailbox. I wasn't expecting anything. The real mail wouldn't come until Monday. But it was something to do. The air was crisp, and my boots sank slightly into the snow. As I turned back toward the house, I saw movement at the corner of the block. A figure coming up the sidewalk, arms wrapped tightly around a cardboard box. It was Marcus. I hadn't seen him in a year, maybe more. He lived with his aunt on the edge of the neighborhood, a lanky teenager with headphones always clamped over his ears, eyes down, shoulders forward like the world owed him an apology. The kind you think is trouble until you see him help an old dog cross the street without anyone asking. "Mrs. Clark?" he called, stopping halfway up my walk. "This yours?" He held up the box. It was one of the bakery bags, the one I'd used for Anna's scarf. Inside was a folded note. I opened it right there on the steps. It was from Anna. Thank you. My mom said to tell you that the scarf is the warmest thing I own, and I'm going to wear it every day until spring. Merry Christmas. Anna. No flourish, no cardstock. Just a note, scribbled in pencil on ruled paper, with a heart drawn in the corner. Marcus shifted awkwardly. She asked me to drop it off. Said you might not open the door for just anybody. I smiled. Thank you for bringing it. He hesitated. She said you gave out gifts yesterday. I did. He nodded, then cleared his throat. Do you have any left? It wasn't greedy. It wasn't hopeful. It was just a question from someone who'd been given so little he didn't know if asking was allowed. I shook my head. Not anymore. He nodded again. That's okay. Just thought I'd ask. As he turned to go, I called out, Wait, what's your favorite color? He looked surprised. Green, I guess? I nodded. Thank you, Marcus. He left with a puzzled glance over his shoulder. Inside, I dug through my closet until I found the last skein of yarn I hadn't used. Moss green. Not much, but maybe enough. I wasn't done giving. Not yet. By late afternoon, my hands ached. Knitting hadn't been part of the plan for the day, but once I started, the rhythm took over. Loop, pull, shift, again, again. There was a kind of silence in the movement that didn't ask for anything, didn't take anything away, just thread turning into warmth. I'd forgotten how steadying it felt. The scarf wouldn't be fancy, not like the one I made for Joanna. This one would be narrower, more rugged, made for cold walks and wind-whipped bike rides. The yarn had a little fleck of blue in it that caught the light when it twisted. I thought about Marcus. Not his shoes or his hoodie, but the way he stood, waiting. Not embarrassed, not demanding, just waiting, like he hoped I might see him. By dusk, I had half of it done, not bad for someone with knuckles like rusted hinges. The doorbell rang. That sound hits different when you're not expecting anyone. It ricochets through a quiet house like something's breaking. I wiped my hands and opened the door. It was Evelyn. I hadn't seen my granddaughter in person since spring. Not since Richard and Joanna had moved 2 towns over and turned every visit into a logistical nightmare. It's just hard to coordinate, they'd say, as if I were asking them to cross an ocean, not drive 40 minutes. Evie stood there now, cheeks red from the cold, scarf looped twice around her neck, curls sticking out from her beanie. In her hands, a foil-covered tin. "Hi, Grandma," she said, eyes searching mine. My breath caught. "Come in," I said, stepping aside before I could ask her why now. She moved quickly, the way young people do when they're carrying more than they admit. The tin in her hands clinked slightly. "I made gingerbread," she said, "from your recipe." I closed the door and took the tin. "You remembered it?" She smiled. "I had to call you twice last year to walk me through it. I wrote it down that time." We moved to the kitchen like dancers who hadn't rehearsed but still knew the steps. She took off her coat. I found a clean plate. We sat. The cookies were a little too thick, a little too soft, just like mine always were. She watched me chew, nervous. "Is it okay?" "It's perfect," I said. And it was. We sat in the kind of silence that only works when 2 people want to be there. Then she said, "I didn't know they didn't invite you. Not until Christmas morning. Dad said you were doing something different this year." I nodded slowly. He wasn't wrong. She frowned. "But he made it sound like you'd chosen it, like you didn't want to be around all the chaos." Did you believe him? She hesitated. I wanted to. I reached for her hand. It's all right. No, it's not, she said, squeezing my fingers. It's not all right, Grandma. They left you out. I don't care how chaotic it is. You should have been there. You've always been there. I looked at her. Really looked. She had Richard's chin and her mother's eyes, but everything else was new. Honest. Unfiltered. I wanted to come sooner, she added. But well, things got tense when I asked too many questions. I smiled gently. You're here now. She bit her lip. Did you really give all the presents away? Yes. To strangers? I shook my head. To neighbors, to children, to people who needed a little kindness. That's all. She leaned back in the chair. You always said giving was the best part. It is, I said, but only when it's received. Evie looked down at the green scarf I'd started. Who's that one for? A boy named Marcus, I said. He's 16. Lives on the edge of the block. She nodded. Can I help? With the knitting? No, with the giving. I blinked. You'd do that? Evie stood and walked to the hallway closet. Of course, but first, where's your extra wrapping paper? I smiled. Top shelf, behind the baking pans. Perfect. She opened the door, pulled out the bag, and began sorting. We didn't have new gifts, but we had gingerbread. We had an extra pair of mittens I never wore. A jigsaw puzzle from years ago still sealed in its box. 3 little candles I'd meant to save for emergencies. Evie picked up each item like it was treasure. I'll walk them over tomorrow, she said, one by one. Evie stayed the night. It wasn't planned. She hadn't brought a toothbrush or pajamas, but when I offered the guest bed, she accepted without hesitation. No phone calls to her parents, no checking her calendar. Just a quiet, I'd like that, and the sound of her boots being kicked off by the door. I can't remember the last time someone stayed here just because they wanted to. She brushed her teeth with baking soda and one of my old toothbrushes I hadn't thrown out yet. I gave her a flannel nightgown that swallowed her whole, and she laughed when she looked in the mirror. I look like a pioneer widow, she said. You look warm, I replied. She grinned. That too. In the morning, she was already up when I shuffled into the kitchen. My knees protested, as they always do before coffee. But I paused when I saw her. She had made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and tea, just like I used to make when she was little and stayed over during snow days. The smell of browned butter filled the room. I wasn't sure how strong you like your tea, she said. So I made 2. I sat down slowly, watching her with something that felt dangerously close to awe. We ate without hurry. Outside, the snow had stopped sometime during the night, and a brittle kind of sunlight now spilled across the backyard fence. The world looked frozen in place, quiet and untouched. After we ate, Evie pulled out the bundle we'd prepared the night before. The puzzle, the mittens, the candles, and the last few gingerbread cookies now tucked into small paper bags with napkins inside. She tied each package with twine she found in my junk drawer, adding a scrap of pine or a cinnamon stick for decoration. Presentation matters, she said, half teasing. To whom? To the spirit of the season, she replied, deadpan. At 11, she bundled herself back into her coat and boots. I'll deliver these, she said. Just around the block. The Higgins boys first, then the Barton kids. I want to see Jenny again. She wrote a thank you note and asked me to bring it to you. I handed her a bag of peppermint candies I'd kept in the pantry. Give them this, too. She leaned down and kissed my forehead. Back soon. The door closed behind her, and the house felt fuller than it had in years. I sat in the armchair with the knitting in my lap. The scarf for Marcus was nearly finished now. I worked slowly, savoring the rouse. The sound of the needles was soft, familiar. The clack of quiet defiance. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Richard. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened. "Mom, we need to talk. Evie told us she stayed over. Joanna's upset. I don't understand why you gave everything away. I wish you'd told us you were feeling this way. We could have, I don't know. Just call me, okay?" I stared at the phone for a long time after that. Not angry, not sad, just done. They wanted me to explain. To soften the truth into something easier to swallow. But what I had done wasn't born of bitterness. It wasn't a cry for attention. It was a quiet refusal. I would not beg for space at a table I'd once built with my own hands. At noon, I heard Evie's footsteps crunching the snow. She came in, cheeks flushed, smiling. "Mission accomplished," she said. "Jenny told me to tell you she read the whole book already. She wants to be a writer now." I laughed. "Poor girl. She says you're her favorite grown-up." My heart twisted. We sat on the couch with the last cups of tea, the scarf between us. "I want to come back next weekend," she said. "If that's okay." I looked at her, this girl who reminded me who I was, and nodded. "That's more than okay," I said. "It's everything." By Sunday evening, the scarf for Marcus was finished. I laid it out on the table and ran my hands along the rows, each loop a small decision, a quiet proof that I could still create something meant to keep someone warm. It wasn't perfect. The tension was uneven in spots, and I'd dropped a stitch near one end, then worked it back in as best I could. But it was honest. That was enough. Evie had gone home that afternoon. She didn't want to. I could see it in the way she lingered at the door, one boot half-tied, the gingerbread tin still in her hands. "I'll call you Tuesday," she said. "That's when they'll stop being mad." "They're mad?" She gave a tired little shrug. "You know how it is. When things aren't about them, they get loud." I only nodded. Before she left, she placed a folded note in my palm. "Read it after I'm gone." And so I did. It was written in her quick, slanted script. I used to think family meant always showing up, even when it hurt, even when they didn't see you. But maybe it's also knowing when to stop knocking on a door that never opens. Thank you for being my safe place. I'll be back soon. Love you, E. I kept the note by the kettle. That evening, I wrapped Marcus's scarf in brown paper and tied it with plain twine. I added one of the peppermint candies for good measure and wrote his name on a scrap of notepad paper. Tomorrow, I'd walk it over. But tonight, I sat by the window with the lights off. I didn't need them. The moon was full and bright, casting long silver shadows across the snow-covered lawn. It made everything look gentle, even the crooked picket fence and the cracked sidewalk. The phone rang again. I didn't check it. Instead, I picked up my old photo album, the big one, with the leather cover and the spine that's coming loose. I flipped through the pages. Richard as a baby, drooling on his stuffed giraffe. Me and James at the county fair, his arms slung around my shoulders. Evie in her first Halloween costume, all tulle and giggles. So many years of showing up. I thought about what Evie had written about knocking on doors. I'd done that, hadn't I? For decades. Knocking gently, patiently, waiting for recognition that never quite came. And yet, here I was. Not unloved, not forgotten, just redefined. The next morning, I tucked the package for Marcus into my coat and walked toward the edge of the neighborhood. The air was crisp, the snow crunching under my boots like dry cornflakes. The world smelled of chimney smoke and something citrus. Maybe someone was boiling orange peels on their stove. A trick I used to do myself. I found the house easily. I'd never been to the door before, but I knew the porch. Faded red steps, a broken wind chime hanging limp by the railing. I knocked. Marcus opened the door, blinking like he'd just woken up. "I brought you something," I said. He looked at the parcel, then at me. "You didn't have to." "I know," I said. "But I wanted to." He took it carefully. Didn't open it right away. Just nodded, eyes on the twine. "You're the only person who gave me something this year," he said quietly. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just reached out and gently touched his shoulder. "That can't be the last gift you get," I said. "But let it be the first of many better ones." He nodded again, this time with a little more weight. I turned and walked back down the steps. At the bottom, I heard him call out, "Thank you, Mrs. Clark." It wasn't loud, but it stayed with me all the way home. The days after Christmas are always quiet in a town like ours. Decorations sag slightly in the cold, wreaths tilt on front doors, and the bins on every curb overflow with crumpled wrapping paper and plastic trays that once held cookies. There's a stillness, a kind of exhale, like everyone is coming down from the sugar and the noise. I've always liked this part of winter best. It asks nothing of you. No songs, no cards, no pretending. Just stillness and snow and whatever you choose to do next. For me, the next thing was the attic. It's not glamorous, my attic. Low ceiling, dusty boxes, one flickering light bulb that buzzes when it's cold. But it holds everything I used to think I needed to hold on to. James's old records, Richard's high school trophies, boxes of fabric scraps and sewing patterns I swore I'd use again, and Christmas decorations. So many of those. Evie's visit had reminded me of something I hadn't faced in years. I'd built a life around keeping things ready for people who stopped coming. I pulled down the ladder and climbed slowly, one hand gripping the rail, the other on the cold wood. My knees complained, but I kept going. The air smelled like cedar and thyme. I opened the first box labeled Xmas, fragile, and found the ceramic village I used to set on the piano. Tiny painted buildings with little windows that lit up if you strung the wires just right. The church, the bakery, the schoolhouse with the cracked chimney. I hadn't unpacked it in at least 5 years. Not since Richard said it looked a bit too cluttered now that we're doing things simpler. So it stayed in its box. Now I lifted the schoolhouse and brushed dust from its roof. The paint had chipped more than I remembered. The bulb still dangled from the wire inside, bent sideways. But I plugged it into a nearby outlet and watched it glow, dim and stubborn. That was enough. I took down 3 pieces from the set: the schoolhouse, the bakery, and the old tree lot stand with the little boy figurine holding a saw. No more. The rest could wait. Back downstairs, I arranged them on the windowsill beside the nativity figures. I plugged the cord into the wall, and the 3 buildings flickered to life, casting faint light against the frosted glass. It looked small, but complete. The next morning brought something unexpected. A knock at the door, 2 knocks, then a pause, then a third. Familiar rhythm. I opened it to find Jenny Higgins and her mother, Ruth. Jenny held a bundle of something wrapped in foil. Ruth carried a small white envelope. "We came to say thank you," Ruth said before I could ask. Jenny grinned. "And we brought you cookies." I stepped aside, stunned but smiling. Come in, come in. You must be freezing." They peeled off coats and boots, settling at the kitchen table as if we'd done this before. I made tea. Ruth insisted on washing the mugs herself. Jenny opened the foil and revealed misshapen sugar cookies with red and green sprinkles. "I made them myself," she announced. "Mom helped." "They're wonderful," I said, and meant it. Ruth handed me the envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of paper with a note. "Thank you for reminding us what kindness looks like. You didn't just make Christmas better for Jenny. You reminded me that community is a verb." My throat tightened. "We're having neighbors over for New Year's," Ruth added, almost shy. "Not a big thing. Just soup and bread and stories. Would you like to come?" I looked at her. This woman I'd known only by her mailbox and the sound of her kids' laughter, and nodded. "I'd like that very much." Jenny beamed. "You can sit by me." Later, after they left, I stood in the doorway for a long time, looking out over my quiet street. I had spent so long trying to get back into one house, I hadn't noticed how many others had quietly opened their doors. New Year's Eve came in on quiet feet. No fireworks. No music in the distance. Just the soft shuffle of the old year getting ready to leave, taking with it things unspoken and unmended. I hadn't planned to go anywhere. The cardigan I wore was the same one I'd knitted 10 years ago, pilled at the elbows, but still warm. I told myself I'd just stop by Ruth's for an hour. 2 at most. Long enough to be polite, to show appreciation. Then I'd come back home and sit in my usual chair with my usual tea. But when I got there, something shifted. The Higgins house was lit up from within. Nothing fancy. Just lamps, and the soft glow of string lights draped along the curtain rods. The kind of lighting that makes even chipped mugs look like part of the charm. The living room was full, but not crowded. There were folding chairs and cushions on the floor, a mismatched quilt thrown over the back of a couch. 2 toddlers played with wooden trains near the fireplace. Someone had brought sourdough and lentil stew. There was laughter. Not the loud, boisterous kind, but the sort that loops gently through conversation, like a second language. Ruth waved me in as soon as she saw me. "Mrs. Clark, you came?" I almost told her she could call me Mavlin, that Mrs. Clark was what doctors used to say before telling me something I didn't want to hear. But I didn't. The way she said it felt like respect, not distance. Jenny ran up and tugged at my sleeve. "I saved you a spot. By the puzzle." She led me to a low table in the corner where half of a 1,000-piece jigsaw sat waiting, an image of a snowy train station. I sat cross-legged beside her, and we began turning pieces over, looking for edges. Later, I met a woman named Althea, who had just moved from 3 states away to take care of her sister. A man named Dan, who taught night school. A girl named Molly, who brought her grandmother's recipe for molasses cookies, swearing they'd fix anything. There were no place cards. No one talked about jobs or achievements. They talked about soup, about laundry, about funny things their kids said, and the best way to keep your feet warm without central heating. At midnight, someone passed around mugs of cider. We counted down together, not loudly, but clearly, like we meant it. 3, 2, 1. And then everyone clinked mugs, not glasses, mugs, and someone shouted, "To ordinary joy." That was the only toast. I walked home in the snow just after 1 in the morning, my coat zipped to the chin, heart full. There was a message from Richard on the answering machine. His voice was tight, slightly annoyed. "Happy New Year, Mom. Haven't heard from you. Not sure what's going on, but..." Give me a call, I guess. Joanna says she tried to explain things to Evie, but it's just gotten all out of hand. I didn't call back. I sat by the window with the tree lights off and thought, I'm not angry. I'm not waiting. I'm just done performing. The next morning, I took down the tree. Not sadly, not ceremoniously, just quietly. The same way it had stood. I packed the nativity figures, the village buildings, the tinsel, and ornaments into their boxes. I labeled each one neatly. Then I opened the front closet and took out the small, unwrapped box that had sat behind my boots since mid-December. Inside was a pair of wool-lined slippers I'd bought for Richard. Dark brown, sturdy, practical. He'd never received them. So I placed the box in the hallway and taped a new label to the lid. Men's 11, free if needed, warm and waiting. I set it outside. An hour later, the box was gone. A week passed. No calls from Richard. No unannounced visits. No apology wrapped in excuses. No, Mom, I think we misunderstood each other, though I hadn't expected one. I'd crossed an invisible line, the one older women are not supposed to cross. I'd stopped asking, stopped waiting, stopped shrinking myself to fit into someone else's version of what family should look like. That sort of thing makes people nervous. But I didn't feel nervous. I felt free and a little hungry. So I baked. Not for a holiday. Not for a birthday or a school fundraiser or someone else's kitchen. I baked because I wanted to. Because the house smelled better with cinnamon in the air and the oven humming softly like an old friend clearing its throat. By mid-afternoon, I had 3 loaves of banana bread cooling on wire racks. One was for me. One, I knew, would end up with Ruth's family. The third, I hadn't decided yet. As I was slicing a piece from the first loaf, the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands and opened the door. Marcus stood on the porch. He wasn't alone. Behind him, half hiding in the shadow of the steps, was a small girl. His sister, I realized, though I hadn't known he had one. She was maybe 7, with narrow shoulders and eyes too large for her face, peeking out from under a knit hat that had seen better days. I hope it's okay, Marcus said. We were just passing by. I didn't believe him for a second, but I stepped aside. Come in. They sat at the kitchen table, the girl silent. Marcus holding her hand gently under the edge of the table, like she might float away otherwise. She's staying with us now, he said after a moment. Our mom had to leave for a while. No one knows for how long. I nodded. I didn't ask questions. She doesn't talk much, he added, but she likes banana bread. I smiled, sliced 2 thick pieces, and set them in front of them with mugs of warm milk. The girl looked at the bread, then at me. What's her name? I asked softly. Marcus hesitated, then said, Delia. I reached across the table, picked up the second loaf, wrapped it in a clean tea towel, and placed it into a paper bag. For Delia, I said. The girl smiled, small, unsure, and whispered, Thank you. It was the only word she said the entire visit. After they left, I sat for a long time staring at the 2 empty plates. Then I stood up, walked to the back bedroom, and opened the cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were the last of my yarn bundles. One of them was butter yellow, soft, thick, perfect for a child's hat. I wound it into a ball, pulled out my needles, and cast on. By nightfall, the first rows were already stitched. The yellow yarn moved quickly through my fingers. It always did, the soft wool catching just enough to keep rhythm without resistance. I didn't follow a pattern, didn't count stitches or fuss with shaping. I just let the thread speak, let the needles follow. It wasn't about perfection. It was about offering. I thought of Delia, her small, hunched shoulders, the way she sat so still beside Marcus, her silence careful, like something practiced. Children like that don't ask for warmth. They don't expect it. They're used to rooms where comfort doesn't come. So I knit quietly, without fanfare, without promises, just a hat. That would cover her ears and stay snug on her brow. That was enough. 2 days later, the phone rang again. I let it ring. Then the machine picked up. Mom, I don't get it. You're doing all this and we're out here wondering if you're okay. You gave away gifts, and now Evie's acting like you're the only one who ever cared about her. It's not fair, okay? It's not fair to make us the villains. I deleted the message before it finished. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I no longer needed to convince anyone of the truth. The hat was done by evening. I tied a small white tag to the inside brim. To Delia, from someone who sees you. Then I placed it in a paper sack, folded neatly with a peppermint nestled in beside it, just like the one I'd given Marcus. Small rituals matter. That night I walked to their house. I didn't knock. I left the bag on the porch, tucked safely behind a potted plant whose leaves had long since frozen, and walked home in the cold with the stars watching. The next morning, a note was slid under my door, written in block letters, clearly a child's hand. I like yellow. Thank you for seeing me. No name. No need. That day, I rearranged the house. Not dramatically. Just enough to make it feel like I was living forward instead of around ghosts. I moved the armchair to the other side of the room, pulled the table closer to the window, put away the second coffee mug I used to set out by habit. This wasn't sadness. This was clarity. At lunch, I made soup and left half of it on Ruth's porch with a note. Share if you'd like. Or save for a quiet evening. I didn't ring the bell. By dusk, the bowl was gone, and in its place was a folded napkin with a quote scribbled on the edge. The best parts of life are soft and slow and full of noticing. No signature. But I knew it was Ruth. Later that night, I began sorting the cedar chest, not throwing out, giving away. Scarves I'd made and never worn. Books I'd reread enough times. Stationery sets too pretty to keep hoarding. All of it ready now. Not for storage, not for legacy, but for use. What good is a life folded tightly in a drawer? There was one plate left on the shelf I hadn't used since Christmas Eve. Not the good china that had gone unused for years. No, this was the wide, simple plate I always set aside for Richard, the one he preferred, with the chipped rim and shallow curve. He used to say it held just enough without feeling like a mountain. I'd kept it near the top of the stack, even after he stopped coming. Old habits outlive their purpose. I took it down now, not for him, but because I was tired of pretending it wasn't there. I placed it on the table, set a folded napkin beside it, poured myself tea, and stared at the empty place across from me. Not with longing, with clarity. This plate wasn't waiting anymore. Midweek brought Evie again. I heard her before I saw her. The sound of boots crunching over frozen footprints. Then the gentle thump of her knocking. "Hey, Grandma," she said when I opened the door. "I brought stew. Dad said you won't answer his calls, and I told him maybe it's time he stops expecting applause for bad behavior." I laughed. "That sounds about right." She kicked snow from her boots and shrugged out of her coat. The cold clung to her like a second skin. "He doesn't get it," she said. "He keeps saying she's overreacting, like you set the house on fire." "I just stopped shrinking," I said. "That's all." Evie carried the stew into the kitchen. "They're uncomfortable, because you've always made space, and now you're making decisions." We sat at the table, the two of us, and shared the stew she'd made. Thick with lentils and carrots and herbs. She'd oversalted it a little, but it was warm, and made with her hands. That was enough. After we ate, she brought out something wrapped in a dish towel. "I made something for you," she said, carefully unwrapping it. It was a small clay dish, wobbly around the edges, the glaze uneven, but it held its shape. A soft lavender hue bled into the rim. At the center, she'd etched a single word: seen. I held it in both hands for a long time, tracing the ridges. "I didn't know what else to say," she murmured, "but that felt right." "It is," I said. "It's perfect." She stayed the night again. No discussion. She just washed the mugs, turned on the kettle, and said, "I'll grab the extra quilt." We didn't speak of Joanna, or Richard, or the missing invitations. We spoke of stories, of soup, of the way snow looks when it's falling at night under streetlight. In the morning, she asked, "Have you ever thought about writing it all down?" "Writing what?" "This," she said, gesturing around. "You. All of this." I looked at her over my tea. "And who would read it?" "I would." That night, after she left, I sat down with a fresh pad of paper. Not for grocery lists, not for names, just the beginning of something I hadn't let myself consider before. A record, not of what was lost, but of what was chosen. I started writing the next day, not with an audience in mind, not for Facebook posts or holiday newsletters, just for myself, for the woman I used to be, for the one who kept her mouth shut during rude dinners and smiled politely when excluded. I began with a sentence that sat heavy on the page. They said Christmas was for the kids, and from there, the rest came easier than I expected. I wrote about the scarf for Anna, the puzzle for Jenny, the candle bags, and the peppermint candies. I wrote about Marcus, about Delia's silence, and the yellow hat that broke through it. I wrote about Ruth's note, and the night Evie stayed and made tea like she'd always lived here. I didn't dramatize. I didn't exaggerate. I just told it the way it happened. It was the first time I let my own voice feel like enough. Halfway through the second page, I paused and reread what I'd written. It didn't sound like something from a diary. It sounded like memory, like a thread being stitched back together from scraps everyone else had discarded. There was peace in that. Around noon, there was a knock at the door. This time, I didn't hesitate. It was Candace Peterson, the twins' mother, holding a bag of scones and a folded note. "They made these," she said, "with supervision. I wouldn't guarantee uniform baking." I smiled and took the bag. "I like surprises." She hesitated, eyes drifting past my shoulder into the hallway. "You're good at this," she said quietly. "At what?" "At seeing people. At knowing what they need before they even know how to ask." "I'm not sure that's true." "It is," she said. "People talk about you now, the good kind of talk." I opened the bag. The scones were odd shapes. One shaped like a comet, another like an accidental map of Italy. But they smelled like cinnamon and butter and trust. "They wanted to thank you," Candace said. "So do I." I nodded once. Not because I needed the thanks, but because I was learning how to receive them. That afternoon, I added another entry to my notes. This one not about a gift given, but one received. Sometimes kindness comes back looking like a child's baking attempt, and it tastes better than anything store-bought. I sat with that thought for a while, letting it settle. Then I made more tea and placed one of the scones on a plate I hadn't used in years. The good china. Not for company, not for show, just for me. At dusk, I lit a single candle in the front window. Not for ritual, not for memory, just because the light felt needed. Evie texted late in the evening. I told Dad I'm not sorry, that I'm proud of you. He said that was manipulative. I told him love doesn't look like exclusion. He hung up. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying, pride should never feel like betrayal. I'm proud of you too. She responded with a single heart. And that was enough. I turned off the lights and looked out at the street. Snow had started again. Soft, flaking, deliberate. The kind of snow that doesn't demand attention but still changes everything. I thought of every person I'd seen that month. Every name I'd written down. Each one a small defiance. Each one a reminder that being seen, truly seen, is its own kind of salvation. I went to bed with the draft pages stacked beside the nightstand. Tomorrow, I'd write more. The last page was the hardest to write. Not because I didn't know how the story ended, I'd lived it, but because endings always carry the weight of how things might have been. And yet, I wasn't grieving anymore. Not really. I was remembering. On my own terms. I began simply. What they didn't understand was this. I wasn't trying to make a point. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was remembering how to matter to myself. By the time I finished writing, the morning light had shifted into something golden, the kind of light that feels earned. My joints ached. My tea had gone cold. But I'd written it all. The giving, the silence, the slow return of breath, and the people who arrived when I stopped asking permission to be loved. I gathered the pages together, tied them with a thin piece of ribbon I found in the junk drawer, and set them on the kitchen table. Not as a memoir, not as evidence, but as truth, in case someone ever needed it. The doorbell rang just before noon. It was Evie. She carried 2 brown bags of groceries and a look I recognized. Something steady, decided. Room in your freezer? She asked. Always, I said. We unpacked together, side by side. Cans of soup, frozen peas, a new tin of cocoa. She set things down like she belonged here, like she wasn't visiting, like she was anchoring herself in a space that had once been denied her. I told them, I'm staying with you next weekend, she said. They didn't argue this time. I think they're starting to realize I mean it. You do, I said. She paused, then pulled something small from her coat pocket. A printed card. On the front, in neat block letters, was the title, The Year Grandma Saved Christmas. Inside was a single sentence. Available soon. Told in her own words. I stared at it. Evie grinned. I asked a friend to design it. Thought maybe other people should hear your story. You want to publish it? I want to share it. You lived it. I just put a frame around it. I didn't answer right away. I touched the card, ran my thumb along the edge. I never thought of myself as someone worth reading about, I said softly. Evie leaned forward. That's because no one ever gave you the pen. We spent the afternoon together, baking, talking, not rushing. At one point, she said, You know, you should add something to the last page, something that invites people in. Like what? A reminder that kindness is still possible, that we can choose it. So I added it. One line, just beneath the final paragraph. If this meant something to you, pass it on. Let someone else feel seen. Not a plea. Just a thread left hanging in case someone else wants to pick it up. That evening, we walked together through the neighborhood. Snowflakes kissed our hair and melted on our sleeves. Lights blinked gently from a dozen porches. The Higgins boys waved from their window. Marcus nodded as we passed. Delia pressed her yellow hat to the glass and smiled. Not one of them knew each other before that month. Now they did. I looked at Evie and said, "You think this changes anything?" She smiled. "I think it already has." We turned the corner, hand in hand, 2 generations of quiet women who had stopped waiting to be invited and started opening doors of our own. If this meant something to you, pass it on. Let someone else feel seen.